Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, December 5th, 2022. I hope you had an awesome weekend. Thank you for kicking off your week with a little TAC. But here today, we live under the largest government in history. That means we are so far from the Constitution of the founders and the ratifiers that it's almost, in my mind, it's absurd to be concerned about which person or which team is going to continue growing the size and scope of that largest government in history instead of resisting it. Anyways, on this episode, I instead want to take us back to the foundation. I've got 6 core principles from the founders and old revolutionaries that will help us better understand freedom, but also how to defend it as we are supposed to. But first of all, before getting to that, a quick hello, a huge thank you. Again, thank you so much for being here. Whether this is your first time or you've been here for every single one since day one, I can't thank you enough. And while we allow people another minute or so to get notifications to join us on the live stream, these mainstream platforms are a little slow sometimes. I want to say hi and give people a moment. Say hi to everyone out in the live chat. There's Haji in Southeast Michigan, Cheriton Farmer in Missouri, Kirk Morrison in South Carolina, Dixie Strong in Bama, Tim Martin in Arizona, Dave Simmons, and who else am I? Jonathan Shellman. Good to see you, Clay Kent, Brian in Georgia, Poet Fisherman in Iowa, and everyone else. Alt Reality, first live stream. Good. Awesome. Welcome. Hopefully you enjoy it. And if you've got questions, whether it's just for a first time or anybody here, whether it's you've been here forever, you can send me questions either through the chat or post comments in the archive, or you can email team@10thamendmentcenter.com. I get tons of ideas for future episodes from your feedback, whether positive or sometimes negative. Anyways, I should also quickly mention that if you want to follow along with the original source documents that I'm going to be mentioning in this episode, I've got tons of quotes from founders like Jefferson, who's up on the screen, Benjamin Franklin, and many others. You definitely want to follow us at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. There I publish a blog post for each episode about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done. You're going to find all the different platforms we're on, both audio only and the video version. And then also you'll have a show links section so you can read and learn more in context on your own time. With that rambling, let's get to this. I've got 6 core principles from the founders and old revolutionaries. I want to start out with number 1, that rights are rights, whether the government respects them or not. Thomas Jefferson put it this way: just because the government passes a law does not mean that it's, well, here's how he put it. He did it much better than I. Law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of the individual. The tyrant's will, that is not something found in freedom. And Jefferson, I think, nailed it. Benjamin Franklin, on June 2nd, 1787, reminds us that all history informs us. He was a student of history, unlike so many of us today are not. We do our best, of course. But even with the limited access to information of the founders and old revolutionaries, they were really good students of history. And Benjamin Franklin says that all history informs us that there has been in every state and kingdom a constant kind of warfare between the governing and the governed. We have to understand that government, even in its best state, as Thomas Paine put it, mind you, in its best state is but a necessary evil. So if the best it can do is still being evil, we have to understand that it's always going to be in conflict with our liberty. James Iredell, one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court, he was nominated for that by George Washington. He said, "This is the foundation on which persecution has been raised in every part of the world." Again, a student of history, understanding the founders actually wanted to, whether they made mistakes or not, they certainly wanted to look through history and say, well, if this type of a situation happened in the past and we replicate the same scenario here, where it's going to have the exact same results. So they tried to do things differently. He said, this is the foundation on which persecution has been raised in every part of the world. The people in power were always right, and everybody else wrong. So rights are rights, whether the government agrees with us or not. We have to understand that even if you supposedly live in a land of the free, what the government does is not going to be in line with your liberty. Number 2 is rights are not gifts from government. If we understand that we have our rights, whether the government happens to go along with them, support them, protect them or not, we have to also understand that we get our rights from somewhere other than government. Thomas Paine put it this way: it is a perversion of terms to say that a charter gives rights. And Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, said among the natural rights, mind you, it's among the natural rights of the colonists, there are many, many others. Among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, a right to life; secondly, to liberty; thirdly, to property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner they can. So rights are not gifts from government, they are natural rights. You have your rights not because you have a Second Amendment, for example. You have your rights because you were born, because you exist, because you're human. They come from your creator, from God, from nature, from humanity, whatever you want to go with. It's not from government. So that's number 2. Number 3, and we're getting a hint here at this from Samuel Adams, but number 3 is that property rights are essential to securing the rights to life and liberty. And Fisher Ames in Massachusetts said, where property is safe, there is liberty. We have property in ourselves. We have property in our thoughts. We have property in our physical property. We have the property in the means of our own self-defense. James Madison had a great essay on property that I covered. Man, I should have had a link to this, but I can't even remember the title of it off the top of my head. Maybe I'll dig it up and include it in the show notes. But James Madison, around 1795, had a great essay on property where he talked about property rights not just being physical property, but our thoughts, our beings, everything about ourselves. Property, where property is safe, Fisher Ames put it, there is liberty. John Adams, property must be secured or liberty cannot exist. So that's the Massachusetts view from Fisher Ames and John Madison, or John Adams, John Madison. Wow. Arthur Lee down in Virginia put it this way: the right of property is the guardian of every other right. And to deprive a people of this is, in fact, to deprive them of their liberty. And we know that all through history, as Benjamin Franklin told us, as all history informs us, there's always been kind of a warfare between the governing and the governed. And one of the big ways that they've done that is through, well, taxation, theft, through proper attacks on property, to make it as if you have to have permission to own stuff. It's not, they don't punish you based on what you do to another person. If you harm someone, you rip somebody off, you commit violence or fraud. So many things in government regulations are about what you own. Like just merely having a product, having property without permission from government, and sometimes they just refuse to give it to you anyways, means you're a criminal. So the right of property is the guardian of every other right, and to deprive a people of this is, in fact, to deprive them of their liberty. And I think John Dickinson summed up this connection between property rights, liberty and happiness and freedom better than anybody. Here he is in the 12th of his famous letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania back in 1767. He said, "Let these truths be indelibly impressed in our minds, on our minds, that we cannot be happy without being free, that we cannot be free without being secure in our property, that we cannot be secure in our property if without our consent others may, as by right, take it away." So think of that train of thought there. Freedom is what gives a people happiness, not gifts from government, not the welfare state, not the warfare state, none of that. And you can't have freedom unless you can be secure in your own property, the property of yourself, your thoughts, your actions, the things that you own, your earnings, well, not necessarily all your actions. And then we cannot be secure in our property if they can just say, well, we can just take it away. And mind you, we do not have happiness or freedom in that sense of the penman of the revolution, not even close today. Again, we live under the largest government in history. Nothing is even close to happiness or freedom. And now, Dickinson was actually getting to this as well. He says, we cannot be secure in our property if without our consent. So freedom can only exist in a society of consent. And that's point number 4, foundational principle number 4. Here's John Jay, who went on to become the first Chief Justice of the United States. No power on earth has a right to take our property from us without our consent. So you have to have a society based on consent, or you're not living in freedom. And that's how Samuel Adams put it as well. What liberty can there be where property is taken away without consent? And of course, if you answer 0, none, you got an A on that quiz from Samuel Adams. And this made its way into the Declaration of Independence as well. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. So you're tying a bunch of these together in the Declaration of Independence. Of course, Thomas Jefferson, when he was writing about what he did with the Declaration, of course, he wasn't alone on this. But when he was putting things together, he specifically said he wasn't trying to come up with new ideas. He was trying to put out to the entire world what he called the harmonizing sentiments of the day, the view of the American mind, the view of the people, the revolutionaries, and wanted to explain it to the world. And they were holding these truths to be self-evident, that everyone's equal, that they have unalienable rights, that they don't get them from government. This includes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the government. Now, acquiescence, I should point out, acquiescence is not the same as consent. Living in fear of violence is not the same as consent. So you cannot have freedom unless you live in a society of consent. Number 5 now is centralization of power absolutely destroys liberty. There's no question about it. And decentralization in and of itself doesn't guarantee liberty. It gives it a chance to survive and thrive. Here's William Davey in the North Carolina Ratifying Convention. He said, so extensive a country as this, and mind you, this is in 1788, in comparison today, much smaller. So extensive a country as this can never be managed by one consolidated government. Today, it's absolutely opposite. Anytime there's anything that comes up, whether it's a library in one state or a school board in another state, or a policy on environment or a plant or self-defense, whatever it may be, there's always going to be a national debate over everything, and you got to pick and choose one dude to enforce their way on everybody. But this is totally opposite of the view of the founding generation. As soon as you do that, you're guaranteed to lose liberty. William Grayson put it this way in the Virginia Ratifying Convention: the idea of consolidation, and consolidation was really an extreme view of, or an extreme centralization of power. He said the idea of consolidation is abhorrent to the people of this country. And if the United States in practice today, not these United States anymore, it is now the United States of America, with one policy in essence emanating from the central state in Washington, D.C., and sometimes for the whole globe on some issues. If the largest government in history is not a consolidated government, then there is no such thing on earth. There never will be. So the idea of consolidation at one point was abhorrent to the people of these United States. And Patrick Henry warned us about the dangers that we are going to face. He said, dangers are to be apprehended in whatever manner we proceed. This is in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. And he's talking about, like, okay, no matter what we're going to do here, it's going to be dangerous. Whether we do nothing and we keep the articles, whether we do go forward, of course, freedom can be dangerous, and that's what they want to scare you about. You have to take responsibility for your own actions. And a lot of people hate that. They want to be coddled from cradle to grave instead. But Patrick Henry warned us that dangers are to be apprehended in whatever manner we proceed. But those of a consolidation are the most destructive. Thomas Jefferson, in a letter to Joseph C. Cabell some years later, February of 1816, He put it this way, and there's actually a pretty long passage. Maybe I should do an episode just on this letter at some point. Jefferson's talking about consolidation, centralization of power. He points out in this letter, I know I've cited in other episodes, that he's looking through history. What has destroyed liberty in every government under the sun? Every government all through history, what destroys liberty? Jefferson said the centralization and consolidation of all powers into one. So centralization of power, whether it's William Davey or Grayson or Patrick Henry or Thomas Jefferson, is guaranteed to destroy liberty. And on the other hand, of course, decentralization gives it a chance. But how far do we decentralize? Here's Jefferson, and I think he gives a little hint. The way to have good and safe government is not to trust it all to one, but to divide it among the many, distributing to everyone exactly the functions he is competent to. This is a long passage. I should actually just read a little bit more of it. Let the national government be entrusted with the defense of the nation and its foreign and federal relations. So the state governments with the civil rights, laws, police, and administration of what concerns the state generally. And then even further, he's not just talking about state versus federal. He's also talking about the people versus the state. He said the counties with the local concerns of the counties. And each ward directs the interests within itself. This goes even further than what James Madison was talking about in Federalist number 45, which is the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government were to be few and defined. Those reserved to the people of the states would be numerous and indefinite. And Jefferson takes it even another level further and goes on beyond that as well. So the national government does stuff, the state government does stuff, you get closer to the counties, the wards, and he said, it is by dividing and subdividing these republics from the great national one down through all its subordinations until it ends in the administration of every man's farm and affairs by himself, by placing under everyone what his own eye may superintend, that all will be done for the best. So the closer you can get to the individual making all of their choices for themselves, it's not a full libertarian ANCAP view from Jefferson, but for 1816, you're not going to find too much out there in popular discussion, philosophical discussion, that's even much closer than that. So he's basically saying the closer you can bring things to the individual to manage on their own terms, that will be for the best. That's Jefferson to Joseph C. Cabell, and that's point number 5, again, is centralization of power destroys liberty. Decentralization, getting things closer to the individual, ensures that individual liberty has the chance. He doesn't guarantee that you're going to have liberty. He says this will be for the best. It gives us the best chance. And then number 6, this is something that I repeat over and over and over and over. Ultimately, it's up to the people to protect and defend their own constitution and their own liberty, whether the government wants them to or not. And if we take all of these together, we recognize that we have our rights with or without government. We have our rights whether the government loves them or hates them. We don't get them from government, and we have to secure our property, and government is always at war with the people, right? And they're taking stuff away from us. They take stuff away from us without our consent. We have to recognize that we cannot rely on people and government to do the right thing. We cannot, especially under the largest government in history, if we're hoping to get government to stop doing the stuff it wasn't supposed to do in the first place, and it has been doing for a century, if not 2 centuries or more, you've already lost. Here's how James Iredell put it. The only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. The only resource. Usurpation, I know most of you are probably very familiar with that term, but I've noticed sometimes as we're posting updates and we're sharing quotes like this, sometimes people are saying, oh, I've never heard of usurpation. Usurpation is a term that was very widely understood to the founders, the ratifiers in that entire generation. This is when government exercises, in essence, they're exercising powers not delegated to it. So if, I don't have an example, but anytime they're doing stuff, if we're thinking about sovereignty, the people hold final authority. The people have delegated people of the several states have delegated to this general government stuff that they want them to do. The people are at the top of the food chain. So if government just starts doing stuff that they weren't authorized to do, it's a theft of power. It's a stealing of sovereign power of the people. The term for that, for the founding generation, is usurpation. And so James Iredell, again, this is one of the first associate justices of the Supreme Court. This is a top legal mind of the founding generation. He wasn't just a philosopher or an activist. He was a legal expert. And he said the only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. It's not the inherent right of the people to ask government to stop doing the stuff it wasn't supposed to do in the first place. It's the right of the people to prevent its exercise. Samuel Adams, and this was the hint I was kind of getting at the intro to the episode, he put it this way: the truth is, all might be free if they valued freedom and defended it as they ought. And if the only way to stop usurpation is to prevent its exercise, there's a lot of defending that needs to be done these days. John Dickinson may have my favorite on this. He said he asked a question in his Fabius letters, Fabius number 4, where he was writing in support of the Constitution. And he said, look, okay, there's, a good Constitution can't guarantee a good administration because it's still words on paper. And of course, this is my paraphrase of it. It can promote it. It can make it more difficult for them to violate your liberty, but you still have to have a question. What do you do when government goes beyond its limits? Because that's what government does. We all recognize this. People with power will always try to abuse and expand their power. This is human nature. And then when you live in a scenario where you live under the large empire that we live under now, the people who are drawn to that power are people who love power, and they should be trusted even less. It's the people who don't want to be in office that are more normal, because normal people don't want control. They don't want to direct an empire. That's a sociopath. Well, I'm not an expert, but that's what it sounds like to me. And so Dickinson asked, what do you do about it? He said it's up to the supreme sovereignty of the people. Supreme sovereignty, the final authority of the people to deal with this. He said it is their duty to watch and their right to take care that the Constitution be preserved, or in the Roman phrase on perilous occasions, to provide that the Republic receive no damage. So it's ultimately up to the people to protect their own Constitution, whether the government wants them to or not. So these are our 6 foundational principles. I want to look over in the chat here in just a moment, see if there's any comments or questions I can respond to while I'm on the live chat, while I'm on the live stream. 6 foundational principles that we need to get on the path to liberty. 1, rights are rights whether the government respects them or not. 2, rights are not gifts from government. 3, property rights are essential to securing the rights to life and liberty. 4, freedom can only exist in a society based on consent. 5, centralization of power absolutely destroys liberty every time. Decentralization of power gives liberty a chance. And 6, it's up to the people to defend their own Constitution and their own liberty, whether the government agrees with them or not. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. Hope it was educational, more important than anything. I hope you learned something. Then let's see if I've got any questions here. Oh, people are talking about prohibition. Well, this is an example. Prohibition is a great, well, there's so many versions of prohibition. Right to self-defense prohibition, what you can eat, what you can grow in your backyard, so many different versions of it. We're talking about alcohol prohibition. I guess this is repeal day. Jury nullification played an important part. So did popular resistance. We know that by 25 states had stopped using their own funds to assist in enforcing the Volstead Act. So this was a mass refusal to cooperate, refusal to participate by millions of people, and then in many cases by state and local governments. And that created an environment where it wasn't enforced. We know that the mayor of New York, for example, said, we don't know whether this thing works or not, because it's never been implemented in practice, at least in their area. But that is pure nullification. We're seeing the same thing happen on the cannabis plant. It doesn't work. It's not authorized by the Constitution. And ultimately, even if you love this kind of stuff, we can learn from it. If you love government having control over what people consume, which you shouldn't, that's a bad thing. You don't want to control what people own or what they do in their own private homes or what products they buy and sell. It's if whether or not, well, that's another conversation. But even if you like that stuff, there's so much to learn from the mass resistance on these types of drug type of prohibition that we can apply to so many other things as well. There's a lot of conversation about that. More people, here's Garrett, more people think of the right to property in the terms of you are entitled to own what you earn. Yes, you own what you, I mean, you're mixing your labor with something else and someone is giving you money. They're basically saying that you're working for the government. I know there's people who do calculations over the years. Every time there's tax day that comes or theft day that comes, they say you've had to work for 90 days. The first 90 days of the year, you work to pay the government. And the government, maybe there'd be less talk about this if the government was within the bounds of the Constitution. But we know that government is never going to limit its own power, and the people oftentimes are begging for this. So what they're doing is they're begging for other people to pay for the stuff that they want to do, or what they want to have government do. And it's really just a nasty, vicious cycle that never seems to go away. Until people love and value freedom, as Samuel Adams put it, and defend it, you have to have that 1-2 punch. It's only going to continue to get worse. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. If you want to help us get this type of message out to more and more people, absolutely nothing helps us get that job done every single day more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month. Don't feel obligated, but if you've got some of that dirty fiat lying around that the government is devaluing every single day, throw it our way. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. No one on earth, as my friend Tom Woods one put it, has done more to advance the venerable Jeffersonian tradition of nullification more than us here at TAC. We will make every dollar go a long way to stand for the Constitution and liberty, no matter what the government happens to say or do. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. You can also help us spread the word by leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, smashing the like button, comments, sharing links. All those things trigger the algorithms, especially of these mainstream platforms, video and audio, and it tells them to show us to more people. It helps out a great deal. I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you next time on the path to liberty.